Welcome back to another episode of Al's Vintage Toy Trains. I hope you're having a great day. So today we're going to talk about one of the most popular accessories of all time for Lionel. 1935 would be the introduction of what would be Lionel's most popular accessory, the Gateman. So this is the 1935 version. This is the one that started it all for Lionel. And as you can see, as the train would pass by, the Gateman would pop out, a little light to help lighten up the lantern, and just added a lot of action to the layout. So we're going to go ahead and talk about the pre-war versions of the Gateman, the different variations, and then we're going to hit the catalogs to give you a little background on these. These are great to collect because every year is different, and I will be going through 3 variations that I own myself to give you an indication of what to look for and how to date your pre-war Gateman. So sit back and enjoy. All right, next we're going to talk about the different variations that you will see in these early post-war Gatemen. And I have 3 examples here. The one on the right is from 1935. One in the middle is 1938. And this one here, I believe, is a 1942. And I'll talk about that in a moment. All right, so some of the major variation changes. Let's start with the first of the variations. So the one on the right is the very first year. And the main reason you can tell is that this has the girder work on the pole. So only 1935 and 1936 would have this girder type pole. By 1937, they would go to this solid type pole. All right, next variations we have are the brass diamond-shaped warning sign. And you'll notice that the 35 and the 38 both have the brass warning signs. However, the 35 is distinct. And the reason why it's distinct is that on the sign it says "Look out for locomotive." And that is 1935 only. And by 1936, they would change this by adding the word "the." So it would say in 1936, "Look out for the locomotive." And so that's how you tell the difference between a 35 and a 36. And they made these diamond-shaped warning signs up till about 1939. And so this one you can see has the word "the" between "for" and "locomotive." And some of these diamonds after 36 do not have "made in the USA," but some do. And right at the top it says "made in the USA." All right. So they would go from that diamond-shaped brass warning sign to the die-cast cross bucks saying "railroad crossing." So this would be 1939 or later by this change. While we're talking about posts, the finial would come in 3 different colors over the pre-war years. So they would be brass, like these. These are brass. And then the finial top here is nickel. And in some cases, around 40 or 41, they would come in black. So that's another kind of change. Let's see. On the coal box, the earlier versions have stamping. And you can see it here on the 35. And you can see it here on the 38 version. Same thing. But after 1939, they would go to a decal. In 39, the decal would be sans serif without the little flourishes on the end of the each letter or number. And by 1940, they would go with serif lettering and numbering. And the only exception is this one here, which I believe is 42. Lionel would make a mix of embossed again in 42 and with a decal. All right, other major variations. The older Gatemen would have two moving arms, and so they both would actually move as a pivot. So this is 35. This is the 38 again. Both arms still move. And sometime in 1939 or 1940, he would be molded with one arm molded in and only one movable arm. So you can see that he has just the one movable arm here. And so one other thing you can tell the difference between a pre-war and post-war. Each of these have a little red celluloid over the light bulb to give it that reddish glow. All post-war, it would be eliminated in the post-war period, and so it would just be a red light bulb underneath here instead of a clear light bulb with a red cellophane. The other major difference between pre-war and post-war is they eliminated the chimney in the post-war period. And then the doors. Most of the doors in the pre-war period were all the same body color as the shed itself. However, in 1941, some of the doors would be light red. And in 1942, you could either have a red door or a door that matched the body. And 42 was an unusual year because, as you know, Lionel pretty much stopped production of materials in late 1941 for obvious reasons, as they were ramping up for the war effort. So I believe in 1942, Lionel began using leftover pre-made parts to put together these Gatemen. So I think that's why some would have decals, some would be embossed. And one of the other changes in 42 is that the brass warning sign would come back again in some cases in 42. So you could either see the crossbuck or the brass diamond-shaped warning sign. And in 1935 and 36, you had a choice of a 45 or an 045, and that is because it would come with an insulated track section. So the 45 was for standard gauge, and the 045 would be for O gauge because it would come with an O gauge insulated track section. And let's look at the bottom here. I believe this one is the 045, and it is. So this was originally made for O gauge. Sometime in 1937 or so, Lionel would start using it was called the 41 contactor. And so that allowed them to make smaller boxes because they didn't have a need for the track anymore. And then on my 1941 instructions, Lionel would actually go to using the 153C. So we know the 153 was made in 1940 and later. Same thing with the 145. And they used this 153 contactor. And like I said, these instructions were from April of 1941. And so at least by then, I know that they were using the 53C. Kind of contradicts what I saw in some of the references. And so in 1937, Lionel began calling these the 45N as opposed to the 45 or 045. All right, the other changes Lionel would make along the way would be the paint. And it seemed like they would alternate between silver or aluminum and what they call the 92 gray. So you can see here the 35 and the 36 are aluminum painted. The 38 is also aluminum painted. 1939 and 1941 would also be aluminum painted poles. The 92 gray, like you see here, they would use 92 gray in 1937, 1940, 1941, and 1942. And in 42, the poles could either be gray or silver. So I think that's all the variations off the top of my head that I can think of anyway, that make up the differences. Kind of makes this a fun kind of thing to collect. And like I said, I'm just going over the pre-war versions. And so we'll go over these in detail, why I believe they are the year that they are. So here's the 1935 Gateman. This is the first year of production. And the reasons are, we've got the girder pole, and they only made that girder type pole in 1935 and 1936. But what we previously talked about is the distinguishing factor here on the sign itself. And it says, look out for a locomotive. In 1936, they would add the word the between for and locomotive. So that's what distinguishes the 35 from a 1936. Otherwise, it has all the characteristics of an early Gateman. So it's got the embossed coal box that you see here. It's got the two arms on the man. This is the earlier composition type made guy. That would change in 1939 or 1940, depending on the reference. And otherwise, just like an early Gateman. All the posts in 35 and 36 were silver and typically capped with a brass finial. So there's the 1935 version of the Gateman, the first year. And this is the 1938 version of the Gateman. This is the one that you typically see on my post-war layout. And so it has a solid type pole, and this is the pole. And for 1938, the pole would have been painted silver. 37 was the first year of the pole, but in 1937 it was a 92 gray. So 1938 was also the last year to use the brass diamond-shaped sign. As you can see here, it says look out for the locomotive, has the word the in the middle. And then some of these brass signs, I'm not sure when that switched, has made in the U.S. of America, right there, or made in the USA. See if I can zoom in a little bit more on that. And so some have that and some don't. I don't know when the transition was. But it might have been 1937, might have been 1938, I'm not sure. But we do know that the brass diamond was pretty much last used in 1938 and then would only reappear again in 1942 when Lionel was using up their parts. So the man still has the two swinging arms, and he would change sometime in either late 1939 or 1940, depending on the reference. So he would go to, with one arm would be molded into the body. It was kind of a finer, different, finer composition material. So it looked a little neater. And he only had the one arm swinging as opposed to both. So this makes this a 1938. Still has the embossed lettering. That wouldn't change until 1939 with the decal. And 1939 would go to the crossbuck versus this brass diamond-shaped warning sign. So this is a 1938. And here is the third variation that I have. And again, I believe this is 1942. And I'll explain why. So first off, we've got the newer style guy. So this is later 39 or 1940. He would change to just one swinging arm that you see here. So just the one arm will move. And so that's a major change, either 1939 or 40, depending on which reference you use. What else? So I bought this one from the original owner. It came with the box that you see here. And it came with the original instructions. And this kind of at least tells me it's at least 1941, maybe a little later. Right at the bottom is the 4-41, and that denotes the month and year of the instructions. And Lionel would change the instructions as they made changes. So they weren't always changed every year. So that would just occur whenever a major change happened. And I'm thinking the major change on this one was going from the 41 contactor to the 153C contactor that they show here. The earliest of the versions would have come with an insulated piece of track section. By eliminating the insulated track section, they were allowed to produce smaller boxes to ship these. So that always saved them money there. So, all right, so we know it's at least a 41 or 42. So we talked about the single arm. In 1941, it's pretty much listed in the Greenberg's guide as the doors being a light red. This does not have the light red doors like most of your 1941s. Some 42s had red doors, some had the doors that match the body of the shed. So this obviously matches the body of the shed. 1939 would have had silver paint. This paint is the 92 gray. So 92 gray was made only in 1937, 1940. So we know with the instructions that this is at least a 41 or 42. 41 was aluminum painted poles. 1942 could have come either way, aluminum or the 92 gray. This one is the 92 gray. 41 again would have been the light red door. And so we know it's not a 41. Or at least we believe it's not a 41. So that's what leads me to believe that this is a 1942. And it has the die-cast crossbuck, which they started doing in 1939. The other oddity on this one is that it now has the sticker sans serif. So that was only offered in 1939. And so we know that this is not a 1939. And so that's kind of odd. So 1942 was an odd year. Obviously, the U.S. got dragged into World War II after Pearl Harbor Day, 1941. It's believed that Lionel actually stopped manufacturing parts for trains sometime between October and December of 1941, as they were definitely ramping up for the war effort before that. And in 1942, Lionel would use whatever leftover parts they had in order to make these up. So if it meant having an embossed tool shed or one without embossing, they would throw a sticker on it. And also in 1942, these would either come with the crossbuck that you see here, and in some cases, the 42s came with the brass diamond sign from the earlier years. And so this is why I believe this is a 1942. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the catalogs. So here we're looking at the 1935 catalog. And this looks to be a mock-up of what would become the Gateman, or the number 45. So take a look closely. You'll notice the roof. The roof is green here in the depiction, and it looks like it has shingles. And as we know, the real thing is just a red tin plate roof. They show the stack as being red, when in actuality it's cream color typically to match the rest of the body of the shed. You'll notice that the post is painted red here in the drawing, and in reality it was always aluminum colored or the 92 gray. You'll notice the posts are shown here for connecting the electrical, but in reality the posts are always on this far side that you can't see in the drawing. And then the other unique thing here, you'll notice that it looks like there was a window of some sort that you could see. Lionel never made that. And so those are some of the differences. And then the other oddity, and Lionel would show this from 1935 all the way to 1942, they would show this sign facing the direction that you see in the photo. But all of the 45s that I've seen face the same direction as the man. So a lot of changes from what you saw in the actual depiction in the 1935 catalog, and in reality what they actually made. And here they show the two numbers. You had 045 for O gauge, and you had 45 for standard gauge. So they would do this in 1935, 1936, and they would change that in 1937, going to just the 45N using the 41 contactor. That eliminated the use of using the insulated track section for either an O gauge setup or standard gauge setup. Here we are looking at the 1936 catalog, and it looks like Lionel made a couple of corrections here. And you'll see that the roof is now red. The stack is now the same color as the body. And there's no more window in the door. So they kind of cleaned up their drawing and the look of what actually came. Again, it's kind of funny how the sign is facing a different direction than how it was made, but that would stay throughout, as well as the posts. That would stay throughout in the drawings, but the posts were always on the other side. The price went up from $3 in 1935 to $3.50 in 1936. Here we are looking at the 1937 catalog, and a couple of changes now. So now we're the 45N, where previously you had a 45 or an 045. And they now state that this comes with a 41 contactor. So that eliminated having the track sections in the box. So that made the box a little smaller, probably a little cheaper to ship and move. And now the price jumped from $3.50 the previous year to $3.95. It would remain $3.95 until 1942. Here we are looking at the 1940 catalog. And the only real difference that I see now is that they eliminated the posts on the drawing. Still shows it at $3.95. It's still listed as the 45N. They would still show this type of sign all the way through the end of the pre-war period. So they never did show the crossbucks on the Gateman in any of the catalogs in the pre-war period. So in closing, I just wanted to give you some of the references that I used to help me describe the differences in these pre-war Gatemen. And I used Doyle's reference in the upper left here, Lionel Trains, 1900 to 1942, published about 2005. We've got Greenberg's Guide to Lionel Trains, Volume 3, Accessories, and that was published in 1993. And then this little gem, I dug up some new information out of this from what I've just talked about. And this is Lionel Trains Behind the Scenes, another Greenberg's Guide, and it was published in 1991. So this one kind of contradicts the other two on a couple of things, and one of the major things is that it talks about the 92 gray not coming into the picture until 1941. So it states that the poles on these Gatemen were 92 gray starting in 1941 and then again in 1942. That contradicts these two references where they start talking about the 92 gray coming in 1937. The other big change or difference in this guide is it talks about the 1935 Gateman being the only one with the diagonal lattice work and then going to the solid pole in 1936. These two references state that 36 pole was the same as the 35, that the only difference really was adding the in the sign. So there's a contradiction there too between these two. I kind of concur with the behind the scenes talking about the shortage of aluminum paint, and that makes sense that the 92 gray came into the picture in 1941. Because it doesn't make sense to me to alternate the colors of the poles starting in 1937 between silver and 92 gray. So I would kind of tend to believe what this guide kind of talks about here in the use of that 92 gray. So with that said, maybe my 1938 Gateman is a 1937. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. It was good talking about the differences. For me, it was a good learning experience going through the three that I have and digging through the references and going through the catalogs. And so I just want to thank you all for watching. If you like what you see, please subscribe, please like, tell a friend, and I hope you all have a great day.